What if I told you that the fate of the holiest city on earth was decided not by swords and spears, but by the scorching sun and one fatal mistake? On July 4th, 1187, on a scorched plateau in Galilee, the flower of the Jerusalem kingdom's knighthood vanished, and that day forever changed the map of the Middle East. This is not just a story about a military clash between two civilizations. It is a chronicle of a grand strategic failure that led to the fall of a city held by Christians for almost a century. Saladin, Sultan of Egypt and Syria, did not simply defeat the Crusader army. He forced them into a trap where they did not meet a glorious death in battle, but a slow death from thirst and despair. The story of Hattin is a textbook example of how personal ambition, political weakness, and underestimation of the enemy can destroy a state in a single day. Here among the scorching stones, the era of the first kingdom of Jerusalem ended, and the legend of the noble sultan began. Watch the video to the end to find out what psychological trick forced the king of Jerusalem to make a suicidal march into the jaws of the tiger. Are you ready to learn the truth about what knights really felt in their shining armor? Medieval warfare in the Levant is a story of heat, dust, and fatigue, not just swords and faith. Archaeologists and military historians have long noted that the Crusaders had to fight in conditions for which they were unprepared, both physically and tactically. The imperial elite of Europe knew how to endure cold and dirt, but not the scorching sun without water. Each march became a serious test of the strength of the body in the organization of the army. Home and battle in winter taught them differently, but the desert knew no mercy. Knightly armor in Europe served as protection from the wind, swords, and spears. Under the chainmail, a quilted undergarment made of linen, wool, and horsehair was often worn so that the metal would not bite the body with every blow. In the Levant, this equipment was made using the same method, but it became a temperature trap. The metal heated up faster than the fabric could release moisture, not air. In the Middle Ages, such things were tested by the reality of nature, and the heat tested them too. A full set of equipment could weigh up to 30 kilograms, including a helmet, shield, sword, and additional weapons. For a knight, weight was strength as long as he was sitting on a horse. But under the July sun of Palestine, every kilogram became an enemy of maneuverability and a source of heat stroke. The body sweated profusely, but did not cool down because the material retained moisture. This was not a defect. It was the law of temperature under the helmet and in the armpits of the armor, and people felt it. Modern experiments with reconstructions confirm that natural materials such as clay and moss keep moisture and heat more predictable. But in armor, the main buffer was not moss, but the non-freezing air in the grooves, which was responsible for heat exchange and water removal. Knights knew this from experience, from their hands, their skin, and their experience of living with metal. Their engineering was practical, even if it looked crude. But synthetics didn't know this at all. They locked everything up naturally, and they repaired it in time. Cooling the room at home and warming the body inside the box bed were laws that people accepted in the Middle Ages. But in a military camp and under a helmet, both the physics of pressure and the thermal geography of the area came into play. If the wind was acceptable, the hearth helped and humidity was regulated. But the cold air of the valley did not forgive mistakes, just as the heat of the slopes did not give a knight a second chance without water. A person chose a site for both walls and sleep, and armor was chosen for its weight and battle tactics. Dehydration of a knight in armor came quickly. Saracen archers knew that it was enough to force a knight to move around in armor and without water for a long time, and his endurance would burn out before the general battle. Sweat instantly soaked the underarmor, weighing down the already heavy frame of log-like body joints. When the fabric became damp, the body did not cool down, but suffocated. The physics of cold in Europe did not save in the Levant, but the skill of smearing the body did save there. They did not make a Roman bowl, they made a shock absorber. Heat stroke was an invisible enemy for the Crusader army. It acted silently behind the hours of movement under the sun. The brain overheated, and breathing became scorching hot. People could not seek shelter in the shade if the Palestinian terrain was hot. It was a corridor of temperatures, not open space, and it punished metal and the body at the same time. The horses' equipment also suffered from overheating. Peasants could carry their homes from mud huts to sleds, and knights often lost their horses during the march to a source of moisture. Horses fell from exhaustion as quickly as people did from heat stroke. The enemy's light cavalry could destroy a knight if his horse was dead. In the Middle Ages, people knew this and valued the sun more than the wind. The Saracens knew the terrain better. Saladin really did use tactics to wear down the European army with heat and thirst. It wasn't meanness, it was a deep understanding of the microclimate and physiology. The Crusader commanders knew that removing their helmets would only lead to a loss of reputation in battle and a threat to their personal lives, so people rarely argued and suffered in silence. Heat was the norm in the region. Breathing discipline was the norm in Europe, and these two collided. The large halls of castles could not serve as temperature buffers, and the box bed was not an assembly room. In the Wild West, walls were cut with a W groove, and in the East, endurance was cut faster than the fiber could give up moisture. The corner of the house was fate, and the corner of war was heat. The less load, salvation from heat. Europe did not know this. The Levant knew, and people saw it. The Battle of Hattin was nature's victory over metal. It happened in 1187 when the heavy knightly army of the Crusaders collided with geography and heat that destroyed their forces even before the clash of spears and swords. The men could not remove their armor because the enemy was circling around them. They simply boiled inside their suits of metal, fabric, and inertia that could not be turned off. It turned out that a person gets tired faster than it seems, and this was clear to everyone. Iron, a symbol of strength and chivalry, became not only a tool of defense, but also a cause of defeat. Their armor was the technology of Europe, where precision is important, but it was not the technology of a region where it is important to keep your body warm and your head clear during daylight hours. A helmet without locks at night turned into a thermos of morality over the body. For us, it sounds like a disaster. For them, like the backdrop of war. And that's history. Modern engineers later confirmed that nature can be conquered, but not in heavy equipment without water and the skill of stitch renewal cycles. Medieval solutions were based on experience during the day. Warmth at night, filling grooves and breathing, not machines. Their foundation was in reading the environment. Our foundation is in chemistry. This is a clash of eras. And the main question is back. I'm really interested to hear your point of view. Do you think modern soldiers could withstand a forced march in such equipment in 40-degree heat? What if I told you that the siege of the city was just a diversionary tactic that everyone believed? Saladin was not just a warrior, he was an outstanding strategist who understood the psychology of his enemies better than they understood themselves. He knew that the army of the Kingdom of Jerusalem was strong in defense and virtually invincible if it remained in place, with access to water and supplies. To destroy it, he had to force the Crusaders to leave their fortified positions and go out into the open field. To do this, Saladin needed a lure that the king of Jerusalem could not refuse, and that lure was the city of Tiberius. The wife of one of the influential barons, Raymond of Tripoli, was in the city, which added a personal and political dimension to the situation. Saladin approached the walls of Tiberius and surrounded the city, but did not rush to storm the citadel. His goal was not to capture stones and walls, but to create a sense of urgency that would cause panic in the military council in Acre. News of the siege quickly reached the Crusader camp, sparking heated debate about how to respond to this direct threat. The kingdom's army gathered in Sephoria, a place rich in water and pastures, ideal for defense. Logic dictated that they should remain there and wait until Saladin's army, exhausted by the siege and the heat, would either come to them or retreat. However, there was no unity in the military council, as various factions pursued their own interests and settled old scores. Raymond of Tripoli, whose wife was in the besieged city, unexpectedly opposed the campaign, realizing that it was a trap. He argued that the loss of the city was an acceptable sacrifice, while the loss of the army would mean the end of the entire kingdom. His words were the voice of reason and experience, but in an atmosphere of mutual distrust, they were perceived as cowardice or even treason. Raymond's opponents, especially the master of the Knights Templar, Gerard de Ridford, demanded immediate action. The master of the Templars used aggressive rhetoric, accusing supporters of a wait-and-see tactic of shame and unwillingness to defend Christian lands. For King Guy de Lusignan, this dispute became a real test of his authority and decision-making ability. The pressure from the Hawks was intensified by reminders that the king was living on money sent by the English king for war, not for sitting in the rear. The argument of knightly honor, which so often overshadowed strategic calculation, was once again thrown into the balance. In the end, emotions and political intrigue outweighed cold calculation and common sense. Saladin waited patiently, watching the enemy's actions and hoping that they would make this fatal mistake. His scouts reported every movement in the Frankish camp, and the Sultan prepared to meet them on the arid plateau between Sephoria and Tiberius. He ordered the wells along the Crusaders' route to be filled in and prepared supplies of arrows for his mounted archers. The plan was simple and elegant. Cut off the army's water supply and let the sun do most of the work. When word came that the king's army had left Sephoria, Saladin knew that victory was already in his hands. It was a classic example of how manipulating pride and a sense of duty can lead to disaster. The Crusaders had put their own heads in the noose, which Saladin had only slightly tightened. The decision to go to the aid of Tiberius was the point of no return for the entire kingdom of Jerusalem. The trap snapped shut the moment the last soldier left the safety of the springs of Sephoria. Do you think the king had any chance of resisting the pressure from those around him? In the next chapter, we will examine the personality of the man who made this fateful decision. Want to know the secret that turned the coronation into the beginning of the end? Guy de Lusignan went down in history as the main culprit of the disaster at Hattin, but his role was much more complex and tragic than that of a simple villain or fool. He was a relatively newcomer to the complex political web of the Kingdom of Jerusalem, having gained the throne through marriage to Queen Sibylla rather than through military merit. The local nobility, the old baronial families, openly despised him, considering him an upstart and a weak ruler. This distrust and hidden hostility created a power vacuum in which the king had to constantly prove his right to leadership. An inferiority complex and fear of appearing weak pushed Guy to make hasty and ill-considered decisions. He was under the enormous influence of the radical party at court, led by Gerard de Ridford and Renaud de Chatillon. These men manipulated his insecurity, portraying any caution as cowardice unworthy of a king. Guy feared that if he did not give the order to attack, the barons would cease to obey him, and the kingdom would fall apart into warring factions. He needed a quick and glorious victory to strengthen his throne and silence his critics. On the night before the decision to march on Tiberius, Guy actually changed his mind twice, wavering between Raymond's advice and pressure from the master of the Templars. At first, at a general council, he agreed with the sensible plan to remain in Saft and hold the defense. However, late at night, the Grand Master of the Knights Templar came to the king's tent and in a private conversation convinced him to change his decision. Gerard de Ridford reminded the king of past conflicts and hinted that refusing to fight would be seen as a betrayal of the interests of the order, which financed the crown. The king, lacking inner strength, broke under this pressure. This decision showed that Guy was a hostage to his entourage and lacked the political will necessary to govern the state in a crisis situation. He tried to please everyone, but in the end led everyone to ruin by choosing the worst possible option. His tragedy was that he was a good knight, but a poor politician and strategist. In a system where the king must be first among equals and an unquestionable authority, his weakness became a death sentence for the state. The story of Guy de Lusignan is a reminder that power without authority and wisdom is dangerous, above all for those under that power. He wanted to be the hero who saved Tiberius, but he became the gravedigger of the Kingdom of Jerusalem. His name has forever become synonymous with incompetence. Although he was merely a product of the fragmented and scheming elite of his time, it was internal strife, not the strength of Muslim arms, that made defeat inevitable. The psychological portrait of Guy de Lusignan reveals the decision-making mechanisms that led to disaster. It was not an external threat, but the leader's internal fear and insecurity that catalyzed the fall. He followed those who shouted the loudest, drowning out the voice of reason, like if you agree that a strong leader must be able to say no to those around him. What if I showed you what a day in hell on earth looked like? On the morning of July 3rd, the Crusader army left the shady gardens and abundant springs of Sephoria and set foot on the scorched plateau. From the very first kilometers of the march, it became clear that this was a one-way trip, as the sun began its relentless work of heating the air and the ground. The huge column, stretching for several kilometers, moved slowly, shrouded in clouds of suffocating dust raised by thousands of hooves and feet. Around them, like a swarm of annoying wasps, Saladin's light horse archers circled, showering the flanks and rear with a hail of arrows. They did not engage in close combat, retreating instantly at any attempt at counterattack, but kept the Crusaders constantly on edge. Every step was a struggle, and the army was forced to stop constantly to repel attacks, which further slowed their progress and increased the time spent in the scorching sun. The water supplies they had brought with them were melting away at an alarming rate, and there was nowhere to replenish them, as all the wells had been destroyed or were under enemy control. People began to drink warm, stale water from their wineskins, which did not quench their thirst but only moistened their parched throats for a moment. By noon, the heat had reached its peak, and discipline in the infantry ranks began to crack. Knights in heavy armor suffered no less, their horses collapsing under the strain and dehydration. The rearguard, commanded by the Templars and Hospitallers, was subjected to particularly fierce attacks and barely held back the Muslim onslaught. They constantly sent messengers to the king with requests to stop or slow down, as they could not keep up with the main column. King Guy, seeing the condition of his troops, made another fateful decision: to stop the march before reaching the waters of Lake Tiberius. The halt took place on a waterless plateau, in a place that resembled a hot frying pan. Ahead, the horns of Hattin, the twin peaks of an extinct volcano, were visible. But the path to them was blocked by Saladin's army. The hope of reaching the water by evening collapsed, and the soldiers realized that they would have to spend the night without a drop of moisture. The decision to stop was tantamount to surrender, as it deprived the army of its remaining strength and fighting spirit. Seeing that the Franks were setting up camp in such a disastrous place, Saladin said to his commanders, "The enemy is already ours." The night brought no relief, as thirst tormented the men, and the cries of Muslims and the sounds of drums could be heard in the darkness, preventing anyone from sleeping. The psychological pressure was enormous. The soldiers could hear their enemies pouring water on the ground to taunt them. Surrounded on all sides, exhausted by the journey and the fighting, the Crusaders realized that dawn would bring them not salvation, but death. This march became a demonstration of how nature can be used as the most effective weapon. The army was demoralized, physically exhausted, and trapped with no way out. Saladin did not rush to attack, allowing thirst and fear to finish what the arrows had started. The march, which was supposed to be a rescue operation, turned into a funeral procession. A mistake in planning the route and timing cost thousands of lives. What do you think was worse for the soldiers that night? The anticipation of battle or the agonizing thirst? In the next chapter, you will find out what surprise Saladin had in store for the morning wake-up call. The morning of July 4th did not bring the desired coolness, but instead brought wind, which Saladin decided to use as another weapon. Noticing that the wind was blowing toward the Crusader camp, he ordered his men to set fire to the dry grass and bushes surrounding the enemy's positions. The plateau instantly burst into flames, and thick clouds of acrid smoke drifted toward the hills, where the exhausted Franks were sheltering. The smoke stung their eyes, filled their lungs, and intensified their already unbearable thirst, creating an atmosphere of sheer hell. Through the veil of smoke, thousands of arrows rained down on the Crusaders, fired by Muslim archers who were now shooting almost blindly. But it was impossible to miss the dense mass of people. The cries of the wounded mingled with the crackling of the fire and the battle cries of the attackers, creating a monstrous cacophony. The Crusader infantry, driven mad by thirst and smoke, lost all discipline and rushed in panic up the slopes of the hills, hoping to find salvation there. They left the knights without cover, thus violating the centuries-old interaction between the branches of the army. Left alone in the center of the plain, the knights tried to organize resistance and even made desperate attempts to counterattack through the wall of fire and smoke. They gathered in groups around their banners, trying to maintain some semblance of order, but their horses were too weak to strike effectively. Saladin skillfully maneuvered his troops, preventing the enemy from engaging in close combat and continuing to fire at them from a distance. Fire and smoke divided the Crusader army into isolated pockets, which the Muslims methodically destroyed one by one. The commanders lost control of their troops, their orders drowned out by the noise of battle or simply ignored by the crazed men. King Guy tried to gather his loyal men around him and establish his red tent as a rallying point, but it made little difference. Chaos engulfed the entire battlefield, and everyone fought for themselves, driven only by the desire to survive at any cost. The smoke hid not only the enemy from them, but also any hope of salvation, turning the battlefield into a closed chamber of death. The scorched earth tactic employed by Saladin at the most crucial moment finally broke the resistance. It was a masterstroke that used the weather conditions and terrain to maximum advantage. The Crusaders were suffocating not only from a lack of strategy, but also literally from a lack of air. Nature once again sided with the Sultan, becoming his most loyal ally on that day. The fire on the Hattin plateau was the culmination of the suffering of an army that was already doomed. It was the finale of a drama that began with the wrong decision to leave Safaria. The fire destroyed the last remnants of organization, turning the army into a crowd of victims. The battle was effectively over before the swords crossed for the last time. Are you ready for the shocking truth about the last line of defense? The remnants of the army, pressed by fire and enemy cavalry, retreated to the only available high ground, a hill with two peaks known as the Horns of Hattin. This place, which was the crater of an extinct volcano, became the last stronghold of the Kingdom of Jerusalem. Here on a narrow strip of land, the king, the highest nobility, the knights of the orders, and the remnants of the infantry huddled together, surrounded by a tight ring of Saladin's troops. The slopes of the hill were steep, which gave some advantage in defense, but the lack of water made prolonged resistance impossible. The royal tent was pitched on one of the peaks, and around it gathered the most steadfast fighters, ready to defend their monarch to the end. They repelled one attack after another, displaying miracles of heroism, which, however, could no longer change the outcome of the battle. Raymond of Tripoli, seeing the hopelessness of the situation, made a desperate attempt to break through with his troops. Saladin, showing tactical flexibility, ordered his troops to step aside and let this detachment pass, so as not to get involved in a bloody battle with men doomed to death who had nothing to lose. The Crusaders remaining on the hill were doomed, the ring was tightening, and the Muslim soldiers were getting closer and closer to the royal tent. There was no hope of help, as all reserves had been destroyed or scattered across the desert. It was the agony of an army that, only yesterday, had been a formidable force capable of keeping the entire Middle East in fear. People were falling from exhaustion, unable even to raise their weapons, and many simply sat on the ground, awaiting capture or death. Saladin watched the final stages of the battle, knowing that the destruction of the enemy was only a matter of time. He was in no hurry to send his men into a final attack, preferring to spare his soldiers and allow the sun and thirst to finish the job. The Horns of Hattin became the grave of the cream of European knighthood, a place where pride and mistakes were paid for with blood. The symbolism of this place was obvious to everyone. The ancient volcano became the scene of a catastrophe of biblical proportions. The defense on the hill lasted several hours, but it was only a delay of the inevitable end. When the Muslim troops finally stormed the summit, the resistance was crushed in a matter of minutes. The king and his barons were taken prisoner, and most of the ordinary soldiers were killed or captured as slaves. The Horns of Hattin went down in history as a symbol of complete and unconditional defeat. This place became the point where the Crusaders' power over Galilee physically ended. Geography played a cruel joke on those who did not know how to read it. The height did not save them, but only made their fall more noticeable. Do you think the Crusaders had even a single chance to break through in this situation? In the next chapter, we will talk about a loss that for many was worse than death. The most terrible blow to the morale of the Crusaders was not the death of thousands of people or the capture of the king, but the loss of the life-giving cross of the Lord. For the people of that era, the symbol of faith was a real force that they took with them on their campaign, just as we take the most important evidence of support. Even before Hattin and numerous clashes in the region, knights marched under the sign of relics, as if under an invisible shield of meaning. But it was the cross that was the greatest, a combination of symbol, reputation, mission, and faith. And losing it was worse than losing an army. The true cross of the Lord had been considered the heart of the Christian army since the First Crusade. Its appearance on the battlefield lifted the spirits of the soldiers more than the speeches of kings and commanders. It was a relic that united all classes, from the king to the simple knights and squires. Before the battle, they approached it for a blessing, as if testing not the flame, but their will. And this helped people believe that the outcome was already predetermined in their favor. The relic was indeed always carried into the most important battles and was considered proof of God's presence right there, among the heavy metal of chainmail and horses. The cross was set in gold and precious stones, because this was how its influence and the sacred value of the era were shown to the world. It was kept in such a way that it was visible even in battles where wind and dust made it difficult to breathe. It was carried by the Bishop of Acre, a man who was trusted with the relic, not the battle. And around him, the main, most fierce battle always unfolded. Before the battle, the Crusaders saw the cross not only as a symbol of faith, but also as a sign of victory. Banners could fall, weapons could fall from hands, but the relic remained a source of common warmth and meaning within the army. It did not shout, but it shone with meaning for the eyes and ears of the people of that time. The commanders knew that if the cross stood, so did their spirit, because faith was the fuel for the decisions of the era. At the moment of the Battle of Hattin, Saladin's army deliberately directed its main attack at the center of the Christian defense, precisely because the relic was located there. This was tactical knowledge, not a random backdrop to the war. The knights defended the cross as the upper groove protects the warmth in a house in winter. The first wave defended with a wall of people, the second with a membrane of windows, the third with metal. But the cross was a meaning, not a barrier, and their wills were tested. When Muslim warriors broke through to the point where the true cross was located, it became a turning point not only in the battle, but also in the internal feeling of the outcome of the battle. The knights had fought fiercely and with discipline up to that point, but the loss of the relic would mean the loss of the meaning of the campaign and the sacred protection from within. The momentum of victory that Europe had known in the cold and on the ground was now disappearing before people's eyes. The ranks of knights were weakening faster than the wooden wall could give up moisture, and this was clear to everyone. The Bishop of Acre, who held the cross above the battlefield, was killed during the chaos of the attack. With his death, not only did a man's body fall, but also the spiritual center of the entire Christian defense at the top of the hill. But the slopes of the hills provided a pillow of sleep for people at night on the frontier, while here the slopes provided dust for the winds and arrows. The cross was left without a defender, even though the defense was raging around it. It could be lost in battle, but nature could not be surrendered. Saladin's soldiers raised the relic above their heads as a sign of their complete victory over the Christian army. The people who saw this from the Christian side of the hills did not perceive it as a simple trophy. It was the disarmament of their spirit. In the Middle Ages, symbols had physical power over people's minds. When the knights saw the captured cross in the hands of the enemy army, it was a signal that undermined their confidence in the righteousness of their mission. It was a blow to their inner fire of meaning that could not be extinguished with words, and people felt it immediately. The capture of the cross had enormous ideological significance because it was a proven point of sacred decline for all of Europe. Saladin knew that the trophy had to pass through the field of vision of the army. It was carried through the ranks of the soldiers so that everyone could see the victory, not only with their bodies, but also with their eyes. This reinforced their side's belief in the righteousness of history. The symbol was raised like the wind over the valley where the frost was creeping in. But it was not frost, it was a banner and meaning. Later, Saladin ordered the cross to be sent to Damascus. The city was not a cave, but it was a stage for symbols in the streets instead of a corridor of cold. Even there, the inhabitants felt the rhythm of moral testing by generations. The cross was proof and a point of humiliation for the enemy. That is why the trophy was raised publicly. In Damascus, the trophy was indeed carried through the streets upside down. It was a deliberate act of demonstrating power and striking a blow to the will of the sacred stability of Christians. The master of the great lands knew that even a small relic could raise the reputation of the region if it was displayed as a sign of his righteousness. The upside-down cross was not a detail, but the focus of the era, and it worked. The news of the loss of the true cross reached Europe and shook people no less than the fall of Jerusalem in 1187. Some chronicles describe this event as the collapse of the psychological verticality of the entire Crusader movement. People did not see the numbers of physical losses, but they saw the fall of the soul of the mission in the image of the symbol. The loss of the sacred point of influence would mean the absence of legitimate morality in the reality of their returning winter. The winter of income did not forgive mistakes, and people were afraid. Many Europeans believed that the loss of the cross was punishment for the sins of the inhabitants of the Holy Land and the pride of the commanders who pushed the army to take risks against physiology in the hot sun. This event deprived the Kingdom of Jerusalem of its sacred protection, which in the eyes of contemporaries was a real part of the politics of faith. Banners could be torn, metal could be heated, but the spirit lived in the cross. It fell, and Europe thought of it as pain without choice. The loss of the relic was traumatic even for those who did not fight, because symbols in the Middle Ages were part of the warmth of the head rather than the light of the street wall. Warriors could lose the best that Europe kept in the corners of knowledge, but sacred integrity did not return. The cross was lost not because Christians were weak in spirit, but because the reality of battle was merciless. It was a clash of time, body, tactics, and faith. People lived through this experience, and they knew a symbol is more valuable than iron. But without water, iron is more important than a symbol. Whitewash only reflected light, but it did not embrace faith. The cross was never returned, despite numerous attempts at ransom and diplomatic negotiations that took place years after the battle. Many negotiations broke down not because of the price of gold, but because of the irreconcilable sacred meaning for both sides. The people of Europe wanted to return the heart of the mission, but the Levant did not forgive the loss of the symbol for the will of its historical side. The attempt to buy back the soul failed because the symbol became part of the other side's victory, and it disappeared. Later legends only multiplied the significance of the trophy, but they did not return people to their workbenches, but to the land of reconstruction, to the skill of surviving the cold of Europe and the heat of the Levant at the same time. The knights remembered home and the kitchen as a buffer of warmth, but not a buffer of taste. The cross disappeared, and with it disappeared the hope of returning the campaign as a mission. This remained a lesson in history. The battle destroyed not only the body of the army, but also its soul, the soul of a symbol that could not be replaced, just as air cannot be replaced when it flows into a valley. A house can be repaired, a river can be read, and armor can be polished. But the soul of a symbol cannot be returned if it has been turned upside down and lifted up. And time has passed. And that is the truth. This episode reminds us how important symbols were in medieval warfare. The strategy was not only in the number of copies, but also in the behavior of materials, breath, wind, and fire. Every corner and every relic was checked not by inspectors, but by the elements. People lived differently, which meant that the home of the microclimate of the soul became part of politics. And this politics did not forgive losses, because it was an era where victory over the spirit meant more than victory over metal. And the last line remains the point of the structure, which sounds the same as at the end of every script. Are you ready to accept that our ancestors lived by the mind and experience of physics, not the physics of comfort? After the battle ended, the denouement came, which became one of the most famous scenes in medieval history. The captured King Guy de Lusignan and other noble barons, including Renaud de Chatillon, were brought to Saladin's tent. The Sultan received the king with the respect befitting his rank, understanding the difference between a defeated monarch and an ordinary prisoner. Seeing that Guy was dying of thirst, Saladin ordered that he be given a cup of ice water, sherbet, a drink that was more precious than gold in that situation. Guy drank the water greedily and passed the cup to Renaud de Chatillon, who was standing nearby. Saladin, noticing this, immediately intervened and coldly said through an interpreter, "Tell the king that he gave him a drink, not me." In the Eastern tradition of hospitality, if a prisoner is given food or water, his life is inviolable. The Sultan had no intention of extending this mercy to Renaud, whom he considered a perjurer and a bandit who had violated the truce and attacked pilgrims. Saladin then confronted Renaud with accusations of his crimes and offered him the chance to convert to Islam, which he insolently refused. In a fit of rage, or perhaps fulfilling a vow he had made earlier, Saladin drew his sword and struck Renaud. The Sultan's guards immediately dragged the baron away and beheaded him, throwing his body out of the tent for all to see. King Guy, seeing the death of his comrade, trembled, believing that he would be next. However, Saladin reassured him with his famous phrase, "Kings do not kill kings." He explained that Renaud had crossed all boundaries and deserved his fate for his misdeeds, while Guy had simply lost in fair combat. This gesture of mercy, combined with harsh justice, cemented Saladin's reputation as a noble ruler. The king and the other barons were sent into honorable captivity in Damascus. The scene in the tent was a vivid illustration of Saladin's code of honor and political acumen. By removing the fanatic Renaud, he eliminated the main instigator of the war, and by sparing the king's life, he showed his magnanimity. It was a lesson in diplomacy and power taught on the ruins of the enemy army. The fate of the kingdom was decided not only on the battlefield, but also in the personal relationships of the leaders. This episode revealed the essence of the time. Cruelty coexisted with nobility, and life depended on rituals and gestures. The murder of Renaud was an act of justice in the eyes of Muslims and a necessary political step. Saladin clearly divided his enemies into those worthy of respect and criminals. The disaster at Hattin had immediate and devastating consequences for the entire Kingdom of Jerusalem. Since King Guy had gathered garrisons from almost all the castles and cities for the battle, the country was left defenseless. The walls of fortresses that had been considered impregnable for years were now guarded only by a handful of old men, women, and cripples. Realizing this, Saladin wasted no time and moved his army to conquer the territory that now lay open before him. The cities surrendered one after another, often without a fight, realizing the futility of resistance. Acre, one of the richest ports in the Mediterranean, capitulated almost immediately, giving the Muslims access to the sea and food supplies. Nablus, Jaffa, Sidon, Beirut, and Ascalon fell like dominoes, destroying the kingdom's infrastructure in a matter of weeks. Saladin offered generous terms of surrender. Those who wanted to leave were allowed to take their property and leave the city, which undermined the will to resist among those who were hesitant. Only Tyre, thanks to the fortuitous arrival of Conrad of Montferrat and his determination, was able to organize a defense and hold out, becoming the only island of Christian resistance on the coast. But this was an exception. Overall, the map of the region was being redrawn with frightening speed. The defense system that the Crusaders had built over nearly a century collapsed because there were no people left who could wield a sword. It was not just a military defeat, it was a systemic collapse of the state. Hattin sucked all the life out of the kingdom, leaving only an empty shell. Saladin methodically isolated Jerusalem, capturing all the surrounding fortresses and cutting off supply routes. He acted like an experienced surgeon, cutting off limbs before reaching the heart. The speed with which the cities fell showed how fragile the Crusaders' power in the east was. It was based on military superiority and fear, and as soon as the army disappeared, so did their power. The local population, even Eastern Christians, often welcomed Saladin as a liberator, or at least a more just ruler. The era of Latin domination had come to an end. Castles built to last forever proved useless without garrisons. Stone cannot fight on its own. The empty towers became monuments to the strategic blindness of the command. In September 1187, Saladin's army approached the walls of Jerusalem. The city was overflowing with refugees from all over the kingdom, but there were virtually no professional soldiers. The defense was led by Balian of Ibelin, a knight who had miraculously escaped at Hattin and had come to the city to collect his family, but was persuaded to stay and lead the defense. Despite the desperate resistance of the townspeople, the outcome was a foregone conclusion, and after a short siege and the demolition of the walls, negotiations for surrender began. Saladin, remembering the bloody massacre carried out by the Crusaders during the capture of Jerusalem in 1099, when the streets were flooded with the blood of Muslims and Jews, could have taken revenge in kind. However, he chose a different path, agreeing to release the inhabitants of the city for a ransom, sparing their lives and honor. Those who could not pay were enslaved, but there was no mass extermination of the population. This decision immortalized Saladin's name in history as a ruler capable of mercy, even in the hour of his greatest triumph. On October 2nd in 1187, on the anniversary of the Prophet Muhammad's night journey to heaven, Saladin solemnly entered Jerusalem. The crosses were removed from the domes of the churches, and the Al-Aqsa Mosque was cleansed and reconsecrated for Muslim prayers. Christian rule in the Holy City, which had lasted 88 years, came to an end. This event caused shockwaves throughout Europe and led to the declaration of the Third Crusade. Saladin's victory was complete. He not only destroyed the enemy army, but also returned Islam's third holiest site to it. He united the Muslim world and expelled the invaders, fulfilling his life's mission. Jerusalem became a Muslim city again, and the muezzin's call to prayer rang out over its hills once more. Saladin's triumph was not only military but also moral. He showed that it was possible to win without losing one's humanity. His behavior during the capture of Jerusalem became a model of chivalry that even his enemies respected. History had come full circle, returning everything to its rightful place. The Battle of Hattin and the subsequent fall of Jerusalem were a turning point in the history of the Middle Ages. This event showed that even the strongest army is doomed if it is led by incompetent leaders torn by internal contradictions. Saladin won not by numbers, but by unity of purpose, patience, and the ability to exploit his enemies' weaknesses. The desert does not forgive mistakes, and on that day it became the judge that handed down a death sentence to an entire kingdom. The lesson of Hattin is still relevant today. Ambition without strategy and power without responsibility lead to disaster. The era of the Crusaders did not end in 1187, but it suffered a blow from which it never recovered. The Kingdom of Jerusalem was reduced to a narrow strip of land on the coast, living in constant fear. And in the east, the star of Saladin rose, whose image became a legend that has survived the centuries. Do you think this catastrophe was inevitable? Or did the Crusaders have a chance to preserve their kingdom by choosing a different strategy? Suggest topics for future videos that you would like to see on our channel in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss out on new historical investigations.